Welcome to the Dr. Mudgil podcast. This is episode 83. Episode 83. I can't believe it. We are officially in summer. It's the end of June, and it's actually cold. It's a cold day here in New York. It's going to be cold, rainy next couple of days, but regardless, it's summer. We're getting into summer mode. Two of my kids finished school. I got one that's wrapping things up tomorrow, and this is my end of the school year themed podcast. So I'm actually thinking today, my daughter actually inspired me about the topic for this podcast. So, it's the end of the school year. I know the kids who are in high school are wrapping up their exams. AP exams were last month, and there's final exams and Regents exams for folks that are in New York and all sorts of stuff. And it had me sort of thinking about the concept of everybody screws up. And it was a conversation I had with my daughter that really did inspire this. And just as a matter of background, I'm going to share two stories with you guys about my personal screw ups. And I think, for any students out there who are may not have done as well as they wanted, maybe despite studying their asses off and, really giving it 110%. Sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes in life, things don't always work out as you intend them to, but that's okay because it happens to everybody. So the theme of this podcast is everybody screws up, but the secondary theme of this podcast is everything will be okay. And I'm going to share actually two personal stories with you guys, which kind of highlight this. So in my mind, there's two categories of screw ups. And this is predominantly talking about academic stuff, which again, this is more towards the high school students, college students, and any students out there. But I think these are lessons that can be extrapolated to life in general. So the first category of screw up is when you literally screw up because you didn't try. It's your fault. And I'm going to give you an example of this. So when I was a second year medical student, I kind of hit my stride in medical school. I was studying the proper way, taking academics seriously, kind of for the first time in my life. The rest before that, I was kind of just coasting, and things were basically, came pretty easy. I would do the minimum amount required to get an A. When I got to medical school, I was kind of doing those same tactics. And, everyone in medical school is really, really, really smart. And in my class of 100 kids, my first year of medical school, I was probably, in the top half of students, but not at the top of my class. And one of my friends the summer between first and second year of medical school, one of my friends from college, kind of called me out and said, listen, man, for once in your life, why don't you just try and just see what you're capable of doing? Really try to study, see what you could do. So he made me feel like a loser. And that next year, I really tried. So my second year of medical school was a totally different story. I would study for exams, and I would just dominate. I was just crushing. It was it was like my eyes had opened up for the first time, and I could see for the first time. If the average on a test was a 70, I'd get a 95. It was crazy. And I started actually realizing my academic gifts and my academic potential and stuff. But there's one class, the biggest class of the second year of medical school is a class called Organ Systems, or Systems, I think it was called. And you basically learn the pathophysiology of each organ system. So the heart, the liver, the kidneys, blood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the big part of your grade in the second year of medical school. And I absolutely dominated that class. I had probably the highest grade in my medical school class. But a smaller part of that class was a class called histology, where you basically you go to lab and you look at the slides and you learn the cells of each organ. These are the cells of the liver, these are the cells of the kidney, these are, certain cells in our blood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that class, which is a very small percentage of our grade, but a very important class, you have to do well in that class or at least pass that class, I didn't take very seriously. I just kind of fell back into my old habits. I didn't really go to class much. I thought, this is going to be easy. I'm doing so well in this other part of the class that this is just going to be a breeze. So when I took my test in histology, I actually failed it. I failed histology, which was shocking to my professors in medical school because I did so well in the hard part of the class, but I failed the easy part of the class. Obviously, I was freaking out. This is before I started my third year of medical school. I actually took a year off between my second and third year of medical school. So because I did a year of research, my professor was gracious enough to allow me to retake the class in the summer to redeem myself. So I did. I retook histology. I did great. It was, I got lucky. I got away with that one. But the reason why I failed histology was because I didn't put any effort into it. I was, just falsely confident. I was like, I did so well in this other part. I'm going to do well here. And it was entirely my fault. It was a pure lack of preparation. And that happens a lot. So that type of failure, you should feel really bad about. You had the opportunity to prepare, you didn't prepare, and you screwed up, and that's all on you. So the lesson to be learned is, the lesson I learned is, take every test, every class seriously, no matter how much of a fluff class you think it may be. You still need to prepare and do well on the exam. So it was a hard-earned lesson. I was lucky enough to get through it. Oddly enough, I'm actually a pathologist. I'm looking in the microscope every day. It's a huge part of what I do now professionally. So things have come full circle. Now, the second type of everybody screws up is when you study your ass off, you do everything you possibly can, you do everything right, you're burning that midnight oil, you're just doing the very best that you can, taking practice tests, doing it all, and you still don't perform as well as you did on practice exams or how well you think you should have done. And that type of screw up hurts, right? Because you did everything possible and the outcome wasn't what you expected it to be. And, this happens academically. It happens in sports. It happens to professional athletes all the time. It just happens all the time. It happens in medicine. It happens in complications in surgery or if a patient takes an unwanted turn, despite your best efforts. Sometimes things are out of our control. And those are the failures that hurt the most. But, it's important to remember, and this was the conversation I was having with my daughter, is that it happens to everybody, and, yes, it feels bad, but you got to pick up the pieces and move on, because those types of failures in your mind, they just are so loud. They resonate so loudly and are banging around your head, and you beat yourself up about it. But then you forget about all of the successes that you had. Like a small failure like that, which happens to everybody, if you're really working hard and you're very, very diligent about doing your schoolwork in this instance and studying, etc. Sometimes, you get thrown a curveball on a test, or maybe there was a careless mistake because you were running out of time, or whatever the case may be. But those types of things happen to everybody. But you have to look at those types of failures in context, right? Like, okay, overall, my academic year was incredibly successful. I, got straight A's. I did so great. I studied hard. I did well in all these tests. And there's one little blip, and that blip in the scheme of life will mean absolutely nothing. Which brings me to my second story. So when I was in college, I was always really good at math. Math was one of those things that just came super easy to me growing up. I always do well on standardized tests and that sort of stuff. So when I was in college, I was like, okay, I'll major in I was pre-med, but I was like, I'll major in math, because math comes easy to me. I like it. But what I didn't realize is that when you get up into the higher level math classes, and this wasn't even that high. This was my sophomore year. I was taking a class called linear algebra, which is more advanced. It's this class beyond calculus or whatever. And I realized that, wow, this shit gets real hard real fast. Math in its higher levels is really abstract. All these complex concepts. And, in my mind, I knew my goal ultimately was to go to medical school. So I was taking this class, linear algebra. My first test, did well on it. I think there were 2 tests and a final exam. There were 3 tests in the whole semester. First test, I did fine. I was like, okay, survived that one. Second test, studied my ass off, and I got a D on the test. So this is my first semester, sophomore year of college, and I have whatever, a C minus or C average or something in this class. And I'm thinking to myself, I was like, holy shit, I am effed. If I get a C in this class, I'm never going to get into medical school. My transcript is going to be tarnished, and I'm just, my whole future, it's done. So the chairman of the math department was actually the professor of this class, and I went to his office, with my tail tucked between my legs, and I said, Professor so-and-so, listen, I'm not cut out to be a math major, this was, it was a mistake. I shouldn't have taken this class. But my ultimate goal is to, just get through this class with a decent enough grade so that I could still get into medical school. So I made a deal with him. He was a cool guy. I said, listen, if I get 100 on the next 2 tests, you have to give me an A for the class, and I will drop my math major immediately. And he agreed to that. I was able to sneak out of that class. I won the bet, I should say. But it was very, very stressful. And that was like an example for me of like, despite my greatest effort, like, trying as hard as I could to do well in this class. The test I got a D on, I studied my ass off for. But it just, despite that, I didn't do well on the test. And I realized then that, hey, you know what? Being a mathematician or being a math major is probably not the right road for me. So listen, we all screw up. Everybody screws up. Everyone makes mistakes. Some mistakes we are 100% accountable for. Like when I didn't study for histology, I brought that on myself. I didn't prepare. I screwed up, and I had to, deal with the consequences of that. But sometimes, despite our best efforts, things don't necessarily work out the way that we intend them to. And that happens to all of us. It happens in every career. It's just part of the human experience. And as much as it hurts, it's always important to keep those kinds of losses, especially if, all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed, you're doing everything you can to do the best you can. You got to keep those things in perspective, because frequently you kind of miss the forest for the trees. All that resonates is that failure in your mind, and you forget about all the successes that couch that failure. So for any of you students out there who are getting your grades back now and not as happy as you would want to be, despite your best efforts, just keep that chin up, stay focused on the prize ahead, keep plugging away, because remember that the failure you may feel is likely very small in comparison to the great successes you have achieved. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful, restful weekend. For all the kids that are finishing up school, I hope you have an amazing summer, just ready to recharge yourselves and crush the week ahead for those of us who are working on Monday, and the year ahead for those who have the summer off. Let's get it.